committee hall is called back to order, but we'll stay on recess until we have a quorum. We currently only have four senators at this time. Thank you very much. We're still in recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We are on Chapter 2, Part 1, which is DOE. First amendment on the, with the Committee on Rules, or with the clerk, is one introduced by Senator Tello Taitigui to delete Section 22 from Part 1, Chapter 2 of the bill. Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to bookmark this section, please, of the budget and come back to it. Thank you.
All right. Is she going to bookmark this section?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
In other words, she's booked. That's correct. Well, she's basically, when you place a bookmark, you bookmark the Part 1. In other words, the whole DOE is bookmarked now. But we're still going to move on with the regular, the other amendments. Okay? Okay. Now we'll proceed to Senator Barnett. You have a, it's listed on the drive as B26CBL19B, page 20, COTW, 8, August 14 at 10:11 a.m. It's line 20, page 19. Can you go ahead with your amendment and we can move along?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the amendment reads, Section 23, carry over all funds appropriated for fiscal year 23 for the agencies and programs in Chapter 2, Part 1. Supra or not expended in FY23 shall not lapse and shall be available in fiscal year 24. It's a very simple amendment. Should GDOE have any money left over from FY23, it shall not lapse and shall be made available in FY24. But in discussion with Mr. Cooper Nurse, it's not like they got all this money lying around at the end of the fiscal year, so it's kind of an additional safety measure, Mr. Chair, and I just ask the support of my colleagues for this amendment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Barnett. Does anyone have any comments or objection? Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, regarding the amendment proffered by our good Senator Barnett. I was wondering, Mr. Chair, if we had OFB is going to be here today to answer any of our questions when it has to do with OFB. Yeah.
What is the question you wanted to pose, so maybe we can just
what,
answer?
What was the prior lapses in FY22 or in FY20? Well, right now, what is the expected lapses for DOE anticipated, and what was the lapses for FY22?
Okay, well, the question is for 23, so I wouldn't be asking about
well,
22.
23, we don't have the, we're not at the end of the fiscal year to kind of determine the lapses, but if there is something that you have that's privy, the end of the school year, maybe, when it comes to DOE, the end of their fiscal year is when, Mr. Chair? Is it August, or is it July or June when they end that school year? Is that their fiscal year?
No, the school year starts every year in August. So throughout the fiscal year, even in August, September, they're still spending money to prepare to open schools. So it's a matter of, at the end of the fiscal year, then that's when they do the books, and then that's part of the audit.
Okay.
But the amendment, Senator Tello, is specifically for 23 for them to carry over that funds, if there's any.
Yeah.
If there's any, and I don't know if it wouldn't matter how much is it, and like Senator Barnett says, whatever there is, to just carry it over. That's basically what he wanted, to make sure that they're able to spend it.
I have no objections to this amendment, especially when it comes to DOE with, $240+ million that's given to DOE, and knowingly that, 90% or almost more than 90% of that is all salaries. That there is hardly nothing left over for them for maintenance or, capital improvement projects or anything, even operations sometimes. So, however, I did have a talk with OFB, Mr. Chair, and we were trying to stay, not carryovers, do no carryovers, but if there was one exception, it would be DOE. That one exception would be DOE. But the other agencies, I think it's better not to do a carryover. And at the end of the year, we can determine if that agency really needed that appropriation, that amount that's appropriated to them. Because we would give, let's say, $2 million to a particular agency. Come at the end of the year, they only spent $1.7 million. So they really didn't need that 300 million.
Or
And then-
300,000.
Yeah, and then, now we're letting them let it lapse, and they can spend it for something else. I really think that money should go back into the general fund to other areas or agencies where we underfunded them, where they come up with a loss. But when it comes to DOE, I think this is the only one exception to the rule, I think. So I stand in
Okay.
full support of the amendment, Mr. Chair.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have an is there any objection to this amendment? So we can avoid all the further discussion?
Thank you,
You wanna
Do I
close?
close? Sure, yes. Whether it's 50 cents or 50,000, if they have it left over at the end of the year, they get to keep it and carry it over. That's all. And thank my colleagues for their support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Is there any objection to this amendment? There being none, the amendment passes. Now we'll move to Senator Chris Reyes. You have an amendment. It's found in SB 26 CMD L20, page 19, COTW, August 14, 10:54 a.m. And Senator Dueñas. And you're also co-sponsored by Senator Barnett on this.
Mr. Chairman, and so the amendment shall read carryover of Public Law 37-5 appropriation. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, funds appropriated by Public Law 3705 shall not lapse and are available until fully expended. In the event the general fund cash flows are not sufficient in the first quarter of fiscal year 2024, to fund the entire appropriation authorized by Public Law 3705 prior to December 31st, 2023, said appropriation shall be designated as the first priority for any federal reimbursements of general fund expenditures for Typhoon Mawar relief and recovery. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your assistance on this. As you know, we passed Public Law 37.5 in the early part of this year, in this session, and in a number of different occasions, we've checked with Department of Education to find that to date, there have been no transfers to to Guam Department of Education of these much-needed funds. Mr. Chairman, recently there have been discussions that a subsequent bill that we've passed to allow for $50 million in authorization in response to Typhoon Mawar, that for some reason there seems to have been an identification of this $20 million as part of different fund sources for the response to the recovery. However, many of us feel in the body here that there continues to be a significant need and requirement for this full appropriation to be realized by Department of Education. So we've done kind of two things here, and I want to thank my co-sponsor, the Chairman of Education, Senator Barnett, that we kind of put this in two phases. We're not sure what's going to happen in the balance of the fiscal year, whether or not there will be some opportunities between Homeland Security and Department of Education to realize some of those repairs and much needed facility enhancements as we go through to open the school year. And then, of course, going into the next fiscal year to be able to kind of smooth out that process, and as well as other budgetary concerns that Department of Education has continued to express. I think that we all recognize this as an appropriation, and appropriations, should be respected by this legislature. And so we want to ensure that if there is no ability to expend this money in the balance of this fiscal year, that it simply is identified and carried forward to next fiscal year. And so basically that's the crux of the amendment, Mr. Chairman. I think it's also very fair, and with you as the budget chair as well, I think it gives an opportunity that we do know that there is an opportunity for recovery now to the tune of 90% of funds that are being expended now for the recovery under Typhoon Mawar. And so this really is another opportunity and chance to direct those resources in the event the general fund straight away is not carrying it. And so we think that this is a very fair approach, and we certainly hope to get the body's support. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing the conversation and perhaps debate on the measure. Jesus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Does anyone would like to discuss this? Otherwise, I'll ask for if there are any objection. Okay, Senator, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to ask OFB a question, and that is in regards to cash flow. This amendment makes it sound as if we have a cash flow shortage when we are looking at the minimum 34 million in excess in FY23. And so I just want to know, does OFB see something that tells us there is a cash flow shortage?
All right, Madam Speaker. I would take a short recess while I get someone in here from OFB. Let's call back to order. Madam Speaker, if you can ask your question again. We have Mr. Director Steve Guerrero here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Director, for being here. The amendment says that in the event cash flows are not sufficient, we're going to do other things. We're going to wait for reimbursement. And I wanted to know from OFB, do you see anything that shows that there is a cash flow shortage?
Good afternoon, Senator. Are you referring to the cash shortage for FY23?
I guess so. Or 24? It says it's...
I think, Steve, if you read the amendment, it's referring to are available until fully expended. That's the intent of that amendment by Senator Duenas. And that if the cash flows are not sufficient in the first quarter, you're just reading the amendment, Steve, you'll see what it's trying to, I think that's where the speaker was leading to. I think the verbiage there about in the event not a sufficient cash flow.
Okay, my understanding, Senator, if we're referring to Public Law 3705, that's the public law that appropriated the 20 million to DOE. At this point, the way I'm reading the amendment is it says that notwithstanding other provision, law funds appropriated in Public Law 3705 shall not lapse and are available until fully expended. In the event the general fund cash flow are not sufficient in the first quarter of FY24, to fund the entire appropriation authorized in Public Law 3705 prior to December 31st, 31, the said appropriation shall be designated as the first priority for any federal reimbursement of general fund expenditure for Typhoon Mawar. First of all, it is my understanding that the Public Law 3705 is appropriating funds from FY23. And the way the amendment reads is that if it refers to that if the general fund is short in the first quarter of FY24, which is FY24 revenues, you can't obligate the FY24 revenues for appropriation that was made prior to fiscal year 24. That's my understanding of the provision. So in this case, if you're asking me if there's an anticipated cash shortage for 24, I don't know. We haven't started the fiscal year yet. If FY23, again, the audit is not completed yet. My understanding is there might be some surpluses in the FY23 appropriation. That much I don't know. And as far as the FY22, those funds are still kind of like lingering out there. But the way I'm reading the provision is that it's saying that the 3705 is appropriating money out of FY23, but yet you're using the caveat that if it's short, that you would use that if the FY24 appropriation in the first quarter is short, then you would use that to fund that Public Law 3705, and I think that's not possible.
Point of information, as the author of the amendment.
Yes, please state your point of information, Senator Reyes.
So this is not attempting to appropriate any in the event of a shortfall in 24 revenues. This is designed to capture the reimbursements of fiscal year 2023 that is currently now being expended under the authorization for the governor to use 2023 $50 million for MOAR. We know that currently there is an agreement that is in existence, whether it carries through or doesn't carry through, whereby under the DLAN operation, Department of Education, even as noted this morning, still may potentially use revenue of that 20 million that the governor's claiming has been identified and operational for DLAN, for mold mitigation, other things that will allow for the schools to prepare. Now, in the event the schools do not end up using that procedure, we still will be receiving a reimbursement more than likely in fiscal year 24 from the funds expended in 23. So once again, I'll go over the simple language so that maybe this clears it up. The language here basically says then, if public law shall not lapse and are available in the event the general fund cash flows are not sufficient. Say, for example, we start fiscal year 24 and funds are spoken for, but this appropriation is still available. In the event funds are not available in the first quarter of 2024, because remember now, this appropriation will be for the entire fiscal year of 2024 that we're allowing this 3705 to move into now fiscal year 2024. So this is basically a backstop that the reimbursed funds coming in anticipated in fiscal year 2024 will be first in identified for the purposes of funding this. It's really just an added extra. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Guerrero, if you can explain so that the speaker will understand that in the question about the cash flow, now maybe you may be able to comment.
Okay, again, I believe the way I'm reading the provision, we're talking about a shortage in cash flow in FY24, which is the first quarter. At this point in time, I don't anticipate any cash flow shortage, at least for the first quarter. But should there be, then we have the remaining 3 quarters to hopefully catch up to the level of what we've appropriated in the law. And hopefully those collections will cover that appropriation. But again, that's why I've always cautioned the body when we look at trying to appropriate monies that are coming in the CER report that shows a excess amount. Because we may excess the first quarter of the fiscal year, but come the second quarter when things start to turn for the worse, those excesses in the first quarter would help cover the shortfall in the second quarter as we go through the year. And that's why it's important to note that it's always safe to say that at least by mid-part of the year, we can have at least a picture of how the economy is doing in relation to government revenues. But we can't just assume that for the first quarter of the fiscal year, when we start to realize these excess, it's the best time to start appropriating. That's why we have a 12-month period in the fiscal year to make sure that that 12-month period gives us the opportunity to cover any shortfall we may experience any time during the year, and hopefully by the end of the year, we would at least generate enough revenues to cover the appropriations made. Anything in excess of that, that's great, not a problem. We can go ahead and the body so chooses, appropriate. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell to be, the body to be careful in the way we appropriate. That's all I'm saying.
Madam Speaker, does that
Thank you very
suffice?
much, yeah, Mr. Chair and Director. The reason I'm asking is not because I believe there is any cash flow shortage, but I'm afraid that this second half of the amendment is going to be used as some kind of excuse or some kind of technical, impediment again, despite the intention of the author to expedite the money, that this is going to be used to slow us down. We're talking about FY23 funds, first of all, that were appropriated out of an $87 million surplus or more. We took $20 million and gave it to DOE. They still haven't got it, and they're still tracking a $34 million excess in June. They said even more for July. In other words, they're floating in cash. That's excess revenue coming in on top of what we anticipated and what we appropriated and what we obligated ourselves to spend for, right? Except for typhoon, of course, but that's not what they're using for the typhoon. They're using the $20 million that we gave DOE for the typhoon, for everybody's typhoon expenses. That's what they're using. So we're trying to get the $20 million back to DOE because they're $30 million short. They were short last year. We gave them a little more money. They took it away. They're still short. They're short again going into FY24. We're trying to make sure they get that, but I would just caution against the second sentence. The first sentence, it shall not lapse. Available to fully expend it, yes. The second sentence, and of course, the second sentence, I would rather just delete it myself because I feel like, why are we going to tell DOE to wait for reimbursements from FEMA? Are you kidding? That might take forever. We don't know anything and we don't control that. And we want to fund DOE, so we need to get them their money ASAP. 6 months ago, according to the superintendent, he's critical of us for waiting 6 months to change a law regarding procurement when we've waited for how long for these superintendents to come and make the repairs to the schools, to dedicate the funds. So now that we've got funds to dedicate to these repairs, I don't want to slow their progress. I want to make it go full steam ahead. They need this $20 million, and I think we need to do something more drastic than tell DOE to wait for FEMA reimbursements before you can plan on using the $20 million. So that's all. I just don't want anyone, to use this second sentence to delay DOE as opposed to expedite it. That's all. Otherwise, of course, I support this wholeheartedly. They should have had their money by now, that we have to put anything in FY24 language to make sure they get their FY23 money while we don't have a cash shortage is silly. And it's really tragic when you think about the actual impacts of it. The actual impacts of it are, they're short in what they need. They can't do the mold mitigation themselves. They have to wait. And they've been waiting since June on DLAN tickets for mold mitigation. From a May typhoon, a June DLAN ticket, we went through the month of July. Pago, we're in the middle of August. I don't know when they're going to get this money or their mold mitigation. But I would support keeping the first sentence in. I'm just suggesting to the author that we delete that second part because I just think any hint that DOE has to wait for reimbursement from FEMA versus anyone else in the government wait for FEMA reimbursement, like, why don't we make those people who've been sitting on it since June wait for their reimbursements from FEMA while we take the cash and use it for mold mitigation at DOE? I don't know. This is, you know, we're in an urgent situation, so I'm a little frustrated today because we're trying to open schools, yet we're being told we might open them with mold. Somebody's going to go around with their eyes and tell me whether there's mold in the schools. I don't believe that. That's not how mold works. You know, that's not how we got to the situation we're at today. So if anybody's listening who controls that $20 million, I'm saying cut those DLAN ticket procurements, whatever you're doing up there, cut those out, send them out. Get that done. Get that at least off of your plate. Get it to DOE so that then DOE, after they've done mold mitigation, can tell all of those parents, yes, send me your students. You know, we're doing our best. Yeah, I don't know. You know, when it comes to budgets, I know, Mr. Guerrero, you always tell me, you know, this is, we can't be impatient because we're the legislature. We control this kind of language. We say appropriated from FY23 excess, which we can see on all of the financial statements exists, yet it's the executive branch that controls the cash. So while I respect that, I cannot respect holding off of the money for mold mitigation for DOE. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask the author, if you make the amendment right now and nobody's in objection, we can just strike it here and we'll allow the clerk here to make the changes accordingly. I'm gonna just state it and then you tell me if it's correct. After the word, until fully expended, everything after that will be striked out.
Mr. Chairman, that seems like the appropriate thing to do. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The idea here was to give first dibs only if, for some reason, but we can do that subsequently once the reimbursements start coming in. If we want to identify those funds for education, we can jump on it like a hound dog. So I have no problem with that deletion. I think that
are there any objections? Can I get a second on the motion, Senator Barnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I did speak with the clerks, and we can just strike that whole second sentence.
Okay, you're good?
Yeah, starting with in the event.
Start with that, strike it out, everything else strike
all the way
out.
to the
end. Any objection? Yeah, they did. Yeah, okay. Are there any objection? No objection. There being none, that's striked out. Are there any objection? Okay. On that amendment to the amendment, there are no objections. That motion passes. Now on the amendment as amended, are there any objection? Senator Tello, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, if I can.
But her first. 5 minutes. I'm going to watch the clock this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to Steve, OFB. The $20 million that was to be appropriated to the schools, DOE, where did that $20 million is coming from? Is it excess revenue? Is it from the general fund?
Senator, my interpretation of the law 37-5, it gave the authority to the governor to identify $20 million for the general fund. It did not specify or indicate where that $20 million in the general fund is going to come from.
But didn't we increase revenues in Public Law 37-5? We went back and amended the budget bill and the FY23 budget bill, and we increased revenues to meet that $20 million. Is that correct?
I don't believe
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, if Steve can have a moment, look at the bill 37-5.
All right, we'll just pause for a quick minute while OFB is looking over the bill. Thank you. We're at recess at this time for about a minute. Call back to order. Senator Tello, I think you got your answer, right? We did raise money, or did you want Steve to say that?
So, yeah, Steve, can you please?
State for the record.
Yes, Senator, I believe the amendment to the FY23 budget in 37.5 did increase the general fund twofold. I believe it also increased it for the GPP and the 20 million appropriation in Public Law 37.5 for GDOE.
The reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is not excess revenue. This is revenue, general fund revenue coming in. And that's why in the CRER report, while we have Public Law 3715, which is the LEAP, and 3716, which is the GPA credit, is considered excess revenue that we've taken out. So the $20 million going to DOE is not excess revenue, but it is from the general fund. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, this is an obligation that the government of Guam made when we increased those revenues. So it's not excess. And then it was brought up earlier, Steve, can you verify this? I'm looking at the CRER report, and there was a comment that there was $34 or $36 million in excess revenue. I'm looking here at the CRER report, and we had this discussion that they projected it'll be, well, it's 11,147,000 now, and that BBMR estimated another $5 million by the end of the fiscal year, meaning if there's any excess revenue, it's only going to be about $16 million. So I was just wondering, how did that $34 million come into play? I might be missing something, I'm not sure, but...
Yes, Senator. If you look at, well, I guess it's page 3 of the CRER report, it does show in the total general fund revenues a total balance of about 36.9 million. That is the amount which is the variance between what we are, what the FY23 adopted revenues are with the adjustment and what the revenue tracking is.
Right.
So that amount comes up to about 36.9 million. But you need to also take into account the two appropriations, 3715 and 3716, which was for the LEAP and the GPA credits in the amount of 25 million. You subtract that from the 36.9, you'll come up with the 11.1 million.
So thank you, Steve. And do you concur with when BBMR said that they're anticipating an additional 5 million for the end of the fiscal year, and now tracking any excess revenue coming in at 16 million? Well, 5 million more plus the 11 million, around 16 million more. Is that it?
Again, Senator, the CRER report that I have, which is the official one I have and the only one I have thus far, only shows at the end of June the 11.1.
Okay.
There was conversation here in the last couple of days that it was revealed to the body that the anticipated CRER report for the month of July will yield a $5 million in addition to the 11 million, to have a year-end projection of 15 million. It's not 5 million every month. You take the 11 million, you add on 5 million is what they recorded for July, and that by the year end, we're supposed to realize or anticipate a $15 million or about $16 million excess revenues.
Thank you, Steve, for that clarification. And so what I'm seeing here on the 20 million that was not excess revenue, it was increased from general fund. We increased the general fund revenues. So this is an obligation of the government of Guam. If they do not pay or utilize, or actually the appropriation given to DOE so they can utilize it, it'll be a deficit. Right, Steve? At the end of the year, they're not able to give DOE the $20 million, but yet it's been appropriated in the budget for FY2023. It's already included in there. So if they can't pay it, then we're in deficit 20 million. Is that right?
When you use the word deficit, Senator, we have to be careful. When we talk about deficit, there's two types of deficit you can look at. One, you can look at the deficit in terms of what the body has appropriated versus what the government of Guam will generate in revenues. The other deficit is the type of deficit that normally accounting takes into account is the shortfall in terms of revenues versus expenditures. So if you, for example, we estimate $100, that's what we're going to budget, and we spend $100, but we don't get $100, say we only get 80, then there is a deficit there by $20. But if you appropriate $100 and only bring in revenues of $90, but you don't spend the $100, then you're really not in the deficit. The only deficit you'll be is the amount of what you authorize versus what you expend. So if you only expend up to $90, technically you're still good. You're not in the deficit, but you didn't overspend. Although your authorization authorized you to spend $100. But if you only spend up to $90, then technically you're not really in the deficit because you didn't spend that extra $10 that you did not get in revenues.
But because this is an appropriation and not using of excess revenue, but actual appropriation, it's an obligation to the government of Guam. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again.
So it is an obligation to the government of Guam that 20 million is been appropriated to DOE through the general fund in a budget bill, and if that is not paid out, it's an obligation still in debt to the government of Guam to pay for it.
And you're correct. Again, appropriations are authorization to spend money. If you don't spend it, then it doesn't mean that you're in violation. You're just given the opportunity to spend up to that appropriation level. So again, if you appropriate $1 million and you only spend $900,000, then you're okay. At the end of the year, you record $100,000 as unexpended.
But Steve, my last question, Steve, is that if it's been appropriated and the funds that are coming into the general fund, that has to be paid for before any funds that are using excess revenue is to be paid, right?
Typically, yes.
Typically.
Yes.
So I think the language to say before any excess revenue for FY23 is expended, that the obligation in Public Law 37-5 must come first. That's, I think, if you had that language in the budget bill, wouldn't that mean you can't spend any excess revenue unless you pay the prior year obligation, the obligation of FY23 budget, correct?
If the realized obligation, in other words, actual expenditures, yes.
Okay.
But in terms of authority, like I said, the authority may be there for you to spend. If you don't spend it, then there's no obligation to pay for that authority.
Yeah, so it'd be a lot stronger if the verbiage says that no excess revenue shall be expended until this obligation is fulfilled. $20 million, right?
If you want to word it that way, yes.
Yep, and that will be a lot stronger. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to comment? Otherwise, are there any objection to the amendment as amended? No objection, the amendment passes. At this point, my colleagues, we have completed all amendments. This part 1 is bookmark. Yes. Is bookmark, Rafa? No, she just talked about it. There's no, I received no amendment, and we're not going to entertain any amendment at this point, unless you're going to amend the amendment. But we're good. My colleagues were okay. I already closed it because nobody objected. We're good. We have bookmarked part 1 of chapter 2. Okay, we can come back to DOE. At this point, it is 3:20. Am I correct? We will now proceed to part 2, which is, what is it? Okay, we'll now proceed to part 2, which is charter school. Are there any amendments? Are there any amendments? There are no amendments on part 2, the Guam Academy Charter School Council.
Mr. Chair.
Madam Senator?
Yeah, I'd like to bookmark this section 2, Mr.
All right.
Chair.
Okay, we will now bookmark part 2 of chapter 2, charter school. Okay? Remember, at the end of the chapter, then I will ask to go back to the bookmarks, and then we settle it, and then we close it. And if there's no amendments, then we will close the chapter. Yes, ma'am. Madam Speaker.
Yes, if I could just ask OFB before we proceed. So the charter schools section of the bill says that they will be receiving textbooks from the appropriation made in part 1 to DOE, from the DOE appropriation for textbooks. And so the budget bill says that we're going to give a $1.5 million to DOE, but DOE in their requested 0, didn't they? So I just wanted to figure out if they requested 0, why are we funding them up to 1.5 million? Not that I don't want people to get books. I'm trying to figure out why did they request 0. The way it was explained to me was that they have federal funds to use for books, and that they have to use that first.
My understanding, Speaker, they did request for the 1.5 million for textbook for FY2024. It is in the request. And we funded it accordingly.
The spreadsheet, does that show?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's in the spreadsheet.
All right, because the documents I have show 0. Okay.
Okay, we're going to move along. We bookmark also part 2. Let me confirm. Part 2 of chapter 2. We will now proceed to Senator Fisher.
Point of inquiry.
Go for it.
For the neophytes, could you explain this whole bookmarks thing again?
Okay, what happens is that if you ask for a bookmark, that means you're holding on to that chapter, so whatever needs to be discussed as we, remember we have 3 chapters or 4 chapters or 4 parts in chapter 2.
Right.
Once we complete all the chapter, all parts, then we go back to the first one that's bookmarked and we settle it. We settle all the bookmarks. If there's no amendment to it, then we will close it.
Okay. So
Okay, and then we'll end chapter 2 and we move on to chapter 3 and move on.
Okay.
And you can't come back to it. Once we close it, it's over.
Okay, so we only bookmark in the chapter we're dealing with.
We're bookmarking the part in the chapter.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we're dealing with like chapter 9, we're not going to go back to chapter 2,
No,
right? Okay.
no. Once we're done with 2, we're done. We will continue on. Now we will move to part 3 of chapter 2, which is the University of Guam. And we have First Amendment is Senator Amanda Shelton, line 13 to 18, page 31. I don't have the very top, but you know what it is, Senator Amanda Shelton, please.
Okay, thank
If
you
you
very
go
much,
ahead.
Mr. Chair.
You got 10 minutes to author your amendment, correct? And every discussion is 5 minutes. Then the author has 10 minutes to close.
Understood. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. This amendment is to Section 20B of Part 3, UOG, Chapter 2 of the Education section of our budget bill, to read, an amount to be approved by the Superintendent of Education not to exceed $500,000 shall be allocated from the appropriation in Section 7A of Part 1 of Chapter 2 of this Act to the University of Guam Press for the development, localization, production, reproduction, and/or purchase of textbooks, instructional materials, curriculum, guides, and/or other print, digital, and audio resources for the Guam Department of Education, as well as for the development and facilitation of professional development programs to support the implementation and success of these resources. The University of Guam Press shall provide the Superintendent of Education with an annual report of all activities and expenditures related to funds expended pursuant to this subsection. Mr. Chair, this is an amendment to attach an actual appropriation to the language that existed already for the Guam Department of Education to be able to procure textbook materials from our local publisher at the University of Guam. This is a partnership that they've had now and have been working very closely together, and we heard from Mr. Cooper Nurse this morning with DOE that this is a partnership that they are comfortable with and confident in, that we are able to provide resources, textbooks, and other materials to our students that are produced and created locally with our local experts and input for a curriculum specialized for the students of Guam. And this allows the University of Guam Press to utilize the funding from the Department of Education that it receives for textbooks for it to go directly to the University of Guam Press to produce these materials. I ask our colleagues for their support to be able to provide these much needed materials to our students this coming year.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. You're done? Okay. Folks, follow the amendment to be approved by the superintendent. Don't read into any further. The superintendent has to approve it. Once he approves it, it's not for you to debate. Does anyone like to comment on this? You have 5 minutes, Madam Vice Speaker.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in the spirit of literally working with the Education Department of Guam and the university and the existence of the UOG Press and its mission to literally advance and expand accessibility to knowledge about everything that's happening locally. I want to say that I'm in full support of this amendment, and having seen the progress and the work that the press has done for our island educational materials, I think that this is a win-win. And having had our, I want to say the director of publishing with the UOG Press, literally just always keeping us up to par, sharing in the successes that they do, the networking that they work with other stakeholders within the education arena. I want to say that this is truly a win-win, and I support this effort. So I'd like to thank the good author for proffering this amendment, and I want to say I support it. And I hope my colleagues will support this amendment. Sainamasi.
Thank you, Madam Vice. Does anyone like to speak on this amendment? Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this amendment says, like you said, don't, to read into it, like an amount to be approved by the Superintendent of Education not to exceed $500,000 shall be allocated. So prior to this letter B section, above that, letter A, the sum of $100,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the University of Guam for operations and activity of the University of Guam Press. Such sums appropriated in this section are authorized for the use of local matching requirements for federal grant and aid. So I'm not sure why we even have to spell it out, because I think the superintendent has the authority within himself to approve any kind of purchase or of textbooks, instructional material. And if I'm not mistaken, if it's coming from, well, I have a question. The publishing house, let me ask a question to the author of the legislation. When it says the publishing house, are these academic textbooks, or are these particular textbooks that talk about culture and et cetera? So what type of textbooks are we talking here?
All right, Senator Shelton, do you yield to the question?
Yes, thank you very much. First, the appropriations are two separate appropriations. Letter A is for the actual operations of the University of Guam Press, which has been done in previous budgets. This is their total budget to be able to run the full press. They don't only make textbooks for the Department of Education, they also publish local work. They publish research from the University of Guam. We've seen dozens of launches from the University of Guam Press in just the last couple of years. So they are very busy and have lots of different work coming out of the University of Guam Press that we are extremely proud of. And the money that will be used by the Department of Education, they have been developing localized textbooks for all grades in various subject areas. And they also make different books. As you know, you've seen children's books come out of the University of Guam Press, but this is specific to the Curriculum and Instruction Division of the Department of Education. So they have been working together to create and publish these localized textbooks.
That's it? Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. However, you know, the way it's worded here, to be approved by the Superintendent of Education, not to exceed, I mean, it just, so does it say anything in here that they have to even fork out another 100,000 or another 200,000? By putting an amount like this, it doesn't make any sense, because if the superintendent has the authority, then I don't think this amendment is really needed.
So this, Mr. Chair,
So,
if I may.
Thank you.
Hold on. Go ahead, Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, if I'm not mistaken, we received some literature from Ms. Lola Leon Guerrero, bringing in, it was like textbooks on Chamorro studies and cultural stuff, nothing academic, you know, per se, but I just don't think
a
that
point of information.
We have a point of information, Senator Tello.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Senator Shelton, point
So-
of information.
These are academic textbooks created with the Curriculum and Instruction Department of the Department of Education with the University of Guam to be used in the classroom. These aren't just random reading materials. A lot of what we've seen already are the children's books that have been published and been given to our office to share with our constituents. But there are actual textbooks that are to be printed, and we have that. We can share all of the work from the University of Guam Press. But another reason why this amendment is important is because it allows the University of Guam, with the approval of the superintendent of the Department of Education, to use these funds and to use the procurement process of the University of Guam to get the textbooks to the students quicker. So we heard a lot about the holdups from the Department of Education and how long it takes to spend money sometimes. And the University of Guam is ready and willing, the press, to do this for our students, to help the Department of Education publish these and get them out using a quicker procurement process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's still, you know, I mean, it doesn't really, I just don't see the amendment is needed, because this is something that the superintendent of education has the ability to do it. And if they want, actually every year, if they want to appropriate a certain amount of money to purchase these textbooks, And I'm looking right here, Mr. Chair, that was given to me, and I'm looking for, and I'm sorry if I'm using probably the wrong thing on academic, but these are more like Chamorro context value, Chamorro books, which, you know, I'm a great supporter of. However, I
Mr.
just
Chair,
don't
a point
think
of information again.
One more time, Senator
Yes,
Tello, point of
thank you.
information?
Just to note that part of the Department of Education curriculum is Chamorro for all of our students. And so it's important that we have this curriculum that is developed here on island by our University of Guam Press, again, with local experts to be able to provide those materials.
Thank you. Senator Tello, right back to you.
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
let's try to close this loop.
Yeah, well, it doesn't say anything. I mean, you're just reiterating what you just said earlier, and I really don't think this section is necessary at all. Again, the superintendent has the ability to purchase any of these textbooks whenever they have the funding, or whether it's local funds or federal funds. So I just don't think we should be putting a money amount on something like this when DOE is having difficulty right now just covering their salaries, and let alone the capital improvements, not even capital improvements, the repairs to their schools. We haven't even got to capital improvements. So I'm going to object to this amendment. Thank
All
you.
right.
Another
Thank you.
point of information, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Chair, I am
objected
done.
already?
I don't.
You're done.
need-
Okay.
yeah,
I'm
thank-
offering a point of information for the entire body, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Actually, Mr. Chair, this is a third point of information. I think.
A point
Just
of
to keep it-
information, Mr. Chair.
Okay, folks, stop. Colleagues, I'm the chair. You completed it. I will entertain any point of information. This is not for anybody else to decide. I will decide. Point of information, let's wrap this up, Senator Shelton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, as the section of the bill reads, before this amendment, it would mandate the University of Guam Press to assist the Department of Education without any funding source attached to it. So this will continue to allow the UOG Press to assist, as it says here, if the part that is struck out in the amendment, the University of Guam Press is to assist GDOE with their textbooks and collateral material for development, localization, production, reproduction. And as it reads, it has no appropriation. It's telling the University of Guam Press to do an additional job, an additional mandate without additional funding. And so this allows the Department of Education to funnel that money directly to the UOG Press to be able to create these materials.
Point
Thank
of
you.
information, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go
point
for
of
it. Go ahead. Point of information.
Point of
Senator Tello.
information, Mr. Chair, this is very similar to us passing laws that we mandate them to do something but don't have any funding. And the next thing you know, we have to come up a year later in our budget to fund it. So I just
Okay.
don't want, yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone, Senator Fisher, and I think you're followed by Senator Barnett, or you withdraw, okay, Senator Fisher.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I guess if I could ask a question of
Sure.
the sponsor.
Please state your question.
Yes, sir. The $500,000 that we move out of 7A pursuant to this amendment.
You're not moving any money there. It requires the superintendent to say he can move up to 500.
Up
That's
to,
all.
up
You're
to.
not moving a penny.
Yeah, it could be zero.
That's
could
correct.
be 500,000. Okay, but the dollars that are moved, are they now insulated from the procurement law?
You wanted to ask the author of that question? Is it Senator Shelton?
if
Did
she'll
you understand
yield.
the question?
I think he's asking me if this money will be used without any procurement law. No, that's not the case. I'm saying that it will be used by the University of Guam Press, which follows the University of Guam procurement rules.
Okay.
Thank you, but there's an additional step, sir, and that would be the actual movement of the money from DOE to a vendor, which in this case would be UOG, so it's going to be subject to procurement law unless I'm entirely mistaken. And would the author care to speak to that?
Okay, Senator Shelton, could you just clarify exactly what it's asking about?
I'm sorry, the
Turn
microphone?
on the mic, please. Try that
Thank you,
one.
Mr. Chair. Maybe OFB can speak to this, but I don't think that we're going to focus on procurement law here when we're appropriating the money in the budget bill. So we're giving the authority for the University of Guam to expend the funds that will be approved by the Department of Education and use the procurement authority of the University of Guam. I can't speak to the transfer of money from one DOA bank account to another, but Mr. Director, if you could.
My understanding, the reading of this amendment, it's, what it does is that it allows the superintendent of education to allocate up to $500,000 for this purpose. Now, again, it says, it's just telling the superintendent, if you agree to this, you can go ahead and allocate DOE money, which is, I believe, although it doesn't specifically say it's coming from the 1.5 for textbooks, but
Yes, sir.
it's allowing the superintendent to allocate up to $500,000 for this purpose.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think OFB's point, I take your point, sir. But it is nevertheless an expenditure to a vendor, whether or not that's a UOG or, some publishing house, it's the same thing. But okay, I just have a follow-up question on that one. Is this a cost-saving provision? That's directed to the
Author.
Author, yes, sir.
Will the author answer that? Is that a cost-saving provision that you're putting in? I mean, I'm trying to understand that question, but Senator Shelton.
I can't speak to the cost of the materials that UOG Press will publish. I think that what we can focus on here today is that we're able to locally produce these things and be able to spend our local dollars here locally.
Thank you.
And ensure that these materials are made with the local experts to teach this curriculum.
Thank you. Senator Fisher. Did that suffice?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Senator Brown, I saw your hand up, and I don't think anyone else wanted to speak anyway.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
you'll speak after.
I guess I just got to do my point of order, point of information, so I can extend my time on my amendment. All the years I've been here, I never knew I could do that. What a revelation. This is something that the superintendent of education can transact without us. I think the intent, obviously, is to make sure that the UOG Press gets $500,000. And if the Education Department determines that that's what they need, I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think for us to insert ourselves in this process sounds to me like we're delivering another $500,000 to the UOG Press. So I concur on the objection. I think we don't need to legislate every little thing. I mean, they can do that. The Department of Education can determine what their needs are. And I'm supportive of, the Chamorro culture and expanding everything that we can put in the written work, but I don't think we need to insert ourselves to this degree, the nuances of the relationship between the superintendent of the Department of Education and the University of Guam with regards to the printing of these materials. So I concur on the objection. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Does anyone like to speak? Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What the hell is that dang amendment? I did have some questions about the amendment, but they've kind of been relieved by this language here that says an amount to be approved by the superintendent of education. Because it's my understanding that the textbook that we're talking about is still being completed, and I had just worried that GDOE, if the amendment wasn't worded properly, would be forced to pay $500,000 for a book that maybe they didn't want. But I've seen it, and basically, point of information. What they're trying to do is localize, like the amendment says, a lot of these subjects that maybe aren't representative of how we look and see each other here on island. For example, if we grew up learning about history that, didn't have the perspective of our people, this aims to change it, which is something I support. I think we definitely need more of our perspectives in these things. And so, yeah, I support the amendment. I think what's really firming me on that is that GDOE supports it as well. I know that there was communication with one of the deputy superintendents at least. And so, yeah. That being said, as long as we have this language in here that it's an amount to be approved by the superintendent of education. I think I'm okay with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Point of inquiry, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was inquiry is that Senator Barnett just mentioned that there is a project already going on, and we haven't even put the money out yet, and he mentioned there's already a, is that true, or just?
Can I just clarify my point of information?
Yes, stand by, Senator.
So I was visited by the UOG Press, as I think we all were early in this term, and they had brought a project that they were working on for the Guam Department of Education. It was basically kind of like a localized social studies text. And yeah, so this is, and again, I can't say with 1,000,000% certainty that this money is for that book, but I'm just saying if that work is representative of the type of work that they're doing, and I mean, who hasn't got a book off the village bookshelf? Then I support that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That answer that?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Madam
Chair.
Speaker, you are next, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love the UOG Press. They've been doing great work. I love how resourceful they are. I love how they have gone out and got funding from other places besides the government of Guam. And they are very successful, and I love their books. And I love that they're publishing things that are local, all of it. So this is not about that. For me, this is my only questions on this. I wish I had more time with DOE this morning because I would have asked them about it. To me, this is a DOE issue. Why, if they have a contract, why, if GDOE has a contract with the UOG Press, do we have to get in the middle of that? I hate getting in the middle of procurement issues because it just shows that there are procurement issues that are not being resolved. We're resolving them by doing these funky things, like passing the money to another entity, as opposed to, what is the issue with GDOE? Why is it so slow? Why is it unable to give them the money? What is that problem? Let's solve that. What is the special power that UOG has that it's able to procure? I don't think their people are any better. They've got special powers that DOE does not have, right? Special procurement rules. And if that's the issue, then we should be resolving those things. And if textbooks, what I really don't want to be involved in is they have an existing contract, I hope, or they wouldn't have gone through all this work, right? To procure local textbooks. I asked them, is GDOE going to buy these, or are we mandating GDOE to buy your product in advance of even them being produced? Because they're not produced yet. They've done significant work on it, and I think they're almost ready, and that's why they're looking for the publication money, which I support, but I like that it says it's going to be approved by the Superintendent of Education. I think they've done all of this outside of here. They never needed us to approve whether they were going to do the textbooks or not. GDOE was able to do that with their own curriculum mandates and hopefully meet whatever they have to meet in doing that, right? And so this is just, it's a move the money around kind of thing. Like, I don't know why DOE, if it needs to give the money to the UOG Press, isn't doing that, or if, I don't know why the DOE Press doesn't have authority to do these things under its own existing mandate, or what the actual problem is that we're trying to solve by this. An amount to be approved by the superintendent not to exceed $500,000 shall be allocated, meaning we're going to mandate that they take that $500,000 out of their textbook funds, which, of course, we want UOG Press to get the money, but do I want to make that decision for GDOE that it doesn't need that money for textbooks? Actually, they assured us this morning they're not going to use that $500,000 for textbooks. So they want to give it, I hope there's a contract somewhere with UOG Press that they're going to be complying with. And all of these terms should have been in that contract, whether they're going to do this or that or the other thing. That should all be a matter of contract, and whether they meet the contract specs and GDOE wants to release the money should be totally at the prerogative of GDOE. because they have to answer to the parents for the textbooks and whatever they're using in the classroom. And I did go back to the GDOE budget request, or their PowerPoint during their budget, and they said, in lieu of 1.5 million textbook appropriation, $500,000 to UOG Press. So I'm trying to also remember, what did they say? Why are they not going to buy any textbooks this year?
I had a point of information, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Sorry.
Senator Barnett, point
Just
of
based on my
information.
conversation with the GDOE leadership, the reason why they're not going to buy any textbooks this year is because they have used federal funds to purchase textbooks, and I want to say that they had indicated to me that they were good with textbooks for something like the next 5 years. That's what I had heard. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's good, but it's also concerning at the same time. It's good for money, very concerning if I'm a teacher. 5-year-old books are 5 years old, right? We went through a typhoon. We saw the piles and the pictures of old books being piled up. So I just hope that they know what they're asking for, and they're asking for 0 in textbook appropriation. Give all the $500,000 over to UOG Press, that they can manage their contract the way they're supposed to and be able to account for this money. DOE.
I think, Madam Speaker, I want OFB to respond to
Thank
that
you.
about DOE, so that we get clarification. Where's DOE at on the textbooks, and we can move on that one, and because you still got 5 seconds more. Steve?
Yes, Speaker. Just to clarify, when we met with DOE, a 2 months ago in the office regarding their budget, they did indicate to us that they did needed the 1.5 million for textbooks. They also shared with us that of the 1.5, they were going to allocate up to $500,000 to the UOG Press to do some publication on getting some textbooks into the classroom. But they made it perfectly clear to us they still needed the $1 million.
All right, thank you. It's in there. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing
Sorry.
in their budget request was 0. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Point of inquiry,
if
sir?
can I do another
Point of
point of
inquiry?
information?
What was that? You have a point of information before I go to Senator Barnett?
Well, actually, it's just a point of inquiry. What are they going to use the $1 million for? We just found out they don't need textbooks.
Well-
Why don't we claw that back?
What you're talking about is DOE. That's done. It's bookmarked. Once we start going to bookmark, then you're going to end up killing it. So, Senator Barnett, do you want a point of information you want to provide? None? Okay. We're going to move. Anyone else want to discuss on the amendment?
Point of information.
That have not spoken.
Point of information.
Senator Guåhan,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Correct me if I'm mistaken with this, but Steve, you said they were asking for $1 million for textbooks?
Who are you referring to first? You're referring to DOE?
Steve, yeah, Steve. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But
I
on
wanna
reference
make sure
to
I get it
DOE?
right. Yes.
Okay.
Senator, their request to us, Office of Finance and Budget,
Yes.
was for 1.5 million.
1.5.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I thought I heard $1 million because, yeah, I see the 1.5 in the request. I thought it was $1 million, and then because the request is 1.5 and the additional 500,000 here will make it 2 million basically. So the request is, as stated here, is 1.5.
That's
right?
correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Yes.
I thought I heard $1 million, so
Okay.
I just wanted to get that clear.
Did you want to speak on the amendment? If not, then we're going to move on. 'cause that
I'm
was-
good, I'm good.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak? No one would like to speak. Are there any objection to, or you like to close on that, Senator Shelton? There's 2 objections, right? There's 2. No, there's 2 objections, yeah, Nay, but I'm going to have her close, Nay, so that your objections still stand. Senator Shelton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to close on the amendment. As I stated previously, this amendment would allow the University of Guam Press to receive these funds directly and be able to fulfill this partnership with the Department of Education. It's really not about ensuring that the press has the money. It's about the continuity of these projects for our students and our Department of Education. Yes, absolutely, the language will help us ensure that the money goes there to be able to provide for these projects to fund these projects. And it's my understanding, as the last speaker mentioned, that this has been a DOE procurement issue, and that's why this solution was encouraged and offered by the Department of Education to work together to find a way to continue this project. And it is a way for us to still allow DOE to maintain their prerogative of how they want the money to be used with the University of Guam Press, still requires the superintendent's approval and allows for them to get the work done. So I hope that our colleagues will be able to support this.
All right.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I have information that there is no contract. So I might be wrong that there is even a contract. Can the author of the amendment please clarify if there is a contract current that we're funding here?
Senator Shelton, do you yield to that just so we can wrap it up?
I can't speak to a specific contract, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, but I do know that the UOG Press has shared with us, many senators, that these projects have already been in the works in partnership with with the Department of Education. I don't know if there's an actual contract, but they do have some of these textbooks ready to go to print. They are essentially e-books that that have been shared with us.
Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and move. There is an objection. There's two objections to this amendment. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Just a point of information. I just received confirmation that the UOG Press does have an existing contract with DOE.
Okay.
And
they
that's
do.
from the press. Yes.
Okay, then that's nothing to do with this amendment. But anyway, all in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails. At this point, we'll go to the. No. She only provided that there's a contract. The amendment has nothing to do with folks. Let's pay attention to the amendment. Regardless if there's a contract, the amendment has nothing to do with contract. Come on now. I'm reading English. Thank you. We're going to take a 3-minute recess real quick because the next two amendment is authored by Senator Tello. You have two amendments falling. So we're going to take a quick 3-minute recess. Introduced by Senator Tello Taitigui. We'll begin with the first one, which is on line 14 through 18, page 27. Senator Tello, if you can go ahead and read your amendment, you got 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this amendment just simply strikes out prioritize and use and inserts used and then crosses out grant. Let me read this for us in the record. The sum appropriated herein is authorized for use as a local matching requirement for federal grants and aid and shall be, strike out prioritize and put used for the local matching requirement of the National Science Foundation Guam established program to stimulate competitive research program, and then strike out and other grants. Mr. Chair, this is on section,
It's part 3, chapter 2.
Yes, sir. Part 3, chapter 2. Right. Let me get to this section here. This is actually on section 12. It starts on page 26, actually, section 12, Guam Green Growth G3 Initiative. The sum of $500,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the University of Guam. So this $500,000 is, they said that it's to be a matching grant for the EPSCOR or Science Foundation Guam Establishment Program. So this particular program, from what I gather from the president of the University of Guam, brings in quite a bit of funds. If I'm not mistaken, it's close to $20 million. However, it's separated in 5 years, or 5 years, I think. Not the full amount is given, but it's divided into 5 years. It is useful. However, we want to ensure that this money is prioritized for something that's going to yield additional funding to the University of Guam and the initiative. So we want to make sure that prioritize is not being used, but instead we want to change that verbiage to ensure that this funding is used for local matching requirements for the National Science Foundation Guam established program to stimulate competitive search. So, and no other grants, Mr. Chair, because now you're taking this money and spreading it in different other projects when this is obviously a program that's been on the books and yields additional funding to the University of Guam, and it should not veer away from this particular project according to the new president, as she said that it yields quite a bit of funding. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just securing to ensure that it stays in that program, and that's what this amendment does.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does anyone like to speak to that amendment? Madam Vice, you have 5 minutes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, when I look at this amendment and I look at the shall be used for the specific local matching requirement versus prioritized, I just have some reservations about tying the hands of the university in the efforts to look at bringing in more federal dollars to the island. I believe, Mr. Chair, that this amendment may limit the ability for UOG to leverage outside dollars and to even deliver a greater return of the local investment. And, you know, I've seen the programs that the university works with and the grants that they utilize and they work with and the matching requirements that are needed. So in this effort, I just going to say I have my reservations and I have my concerns. So toward an objection to this amendment.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice. Anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Madam Speaker?
Just want to know if OFB can tell us what it was used for last year?
Steve?
Was it used for matching?
Yes, Senator, the funds that were appropriated in FY23 was used as a matching requirement.
Thank you. Anyone else? There being none, Senator Tello, if you can close. You can close now. There is an objection. Just to advise you of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as you know, that further into this chapter, we will find that an additional $500,000 has been appropriated to the C grant, which also covers UOG on any kind of other grants that are availing themselves to the University of Guam. So it's very important to note that, you know, this particular grant, I keep losing my page here, this particular grant, the escort grant, is a very important one. And I think that any kind of money veering away from a yielding of $20 million to the University of Guam for some other kind of projects other than this particular grant, then we have to ensure that we are taking $500,000 from the general fund to give to the University of Guam, and we want to ensure that it yields a lot more than $500,000, and right now I've been told it yields about $20 million. So this is what we're doing to protect it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. That was the closing. There is an objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. One,
Jesse.
two. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Amendment passes. We will now proceed to the next amendment. Senator Tello, your next amendment is on line 21, page 27.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, staying along the same line of this particular section in the legislation, just further down, you'll notice that the language in this was similar to last year's language in the budget bill, or in the FY23 budget bill. However, when I had the clerks, as well as my office, tried to search for this report that is supposed to be given to the legislature, an annual report, we couldn't find one. We know that the budget bill had passed, you know, in October of last year, that there should have been some kind of report. And I think it should be an extensive report. So, Mr. Chair, what I'm doing is ensure that the legislature is well informed and very transparent on these funds that are being used by the Guam Green Growth Initiative to ensure things like, you know, the expenditures are being used as they put down on paper, because I can't seem to find any kind of report whatsoever to tell us where this money is going. What I have seen is salaries, and they're actually quite high, you know, but there are other expenditures that are in question here, and I'd like to see a report that comes in every 6 months, beginning November 30th, 2023. And it's as simple as that. Just having a more reporting requirement, not once a year, but every 6 months. I think it's important to have this for transparency purposes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does anyone like to speak to this? This is our second amendment. This to amend the bill to read Excel file and written report. It's on line 21, page 27. Changing annual reports to every 6 months. That's all. 7 annuals every 6 months. Anyone like to speak to this? Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to inquire, I mean, if these reports don't exist, then why are we funding it? Or do the reports, does anyone here know if the reports exist? I mean, it's kind of strange we have to mandate it if they're saying they're providing the reports if a report doesn't exist. I don't know whether it does or not, but, you know, I have to go on the information provided saying that such a report has never been published or is At least the current one hasn't been published. If I can inquire if the
Yes.
I think it would be the committee that receives the committee reports. And they're posted every month.
Mr. Just a point of information,
Point of
Mr. Chair.
information, Senator
I
Talley.
have worked with our clerk, our acting clerk, Mr. Chaidigui, and myself, as well as my staff, has looked for this report, and we can't seem to find it. So to answer that question, and that, yeah, the question is, why are we funding this when it hasn't even provided us a full report?
Mr. Chair,
All right. Madam Vice, you have a point of information or
Yes, I
something
do,
with you?
sir.
So that Senator Brown can be,
I
the
don't
question
know,
can be
I
answered?
was at a function yesterday for the Guam Green Growth, University of Guam Conservation Corps 3
Right, and?
graduation, and there was a report there that I picked up.
No, but have they, do you know that, has that been ever submitted to, that's what we need
I
to
was
know.
told by the
That they did.
administrator of this that a copy of this was sent to all the senators. I
Okay.
just got a copy.
Okay, just for clarification, if Senator Brown asked, has that been submitted to the legislature? Sending it to us individually is great, but it's got to be officially received by the Speaker's office and the clerk.
Yes, if it
just
was
so it flows,
received, it
that's all.
should have been facilitated. but-
Understood, but I'm just making that clarification. Senator Brown, you can go ahead and continue, please.
Very fascinating, Mr. Chairman. I don't have an objection to the amendment. I mean, if it facilitate getting the information, probably should ask in detail their expenditures if we want to know that to that degree beyond them just reporting on their programs. I don't have an objection to it. I just want to clarify if there's a need that we have to require it or mandate it, and it's nice if they finally delivered it, but, you know, we're kind of already in the midst of the budget process. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to inquire and comment on this amendment.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak? And I'm not too sure if I heard an objection or not. Does anyone like to speak? Are there any objection to this amendment? There is one. All in favor,
Oh, wait,
please?
wait, wait.
Oh,
may
you
I
can
close?
close.
Yeah, just a real quick.
Okay.
You know, it's one thing to, you know, send us emails, but it's another thing by law when it clearly states that these reports must be submitted to the legislature for documentation, you know, messaging, communication, and it hasn't been done. So, you know, my first inkling was to, you know, not even fund this because they haven't even complied to the FY23 budget law that requires them to provide this annual report. So, you know, if that being said, it was just a matter of, okay, well then let's do it every 6 months, and then let's not wait till it's budget time for them to provide us this information, you know, on the bewitching hour of our budget bill, and provide it in the middle of the year or even afterwards, so that we have something we can look at, and next time we appropriate $500,000, we know exactly where it's going and what it'll yield. So I humbly ask my colleagues for their support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There is an objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Motion passes. My colleagues, we will recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning. Por favor, one of our own employees is being viewed tomorrow morning. Pikitsu. And we will recess now until 10:30 tomorrow morning. And hopefully everybody comes on time, and then we can start and we can finish off part 3 of chapter 2.
Are we still on UOG?
Thank you. No.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, we're still at UOG. All right? We're in recess at this time.